The air in Seattle always smelled like rain and roasted coffee, but for Caleb, the world didn't truly have a scent until he met Elena. They met in a crowded bookstore on a Tuesday, the kind of day that usually disappears into the gray periphery of life. Caleb was a restoration architect, a man who spent his days trying to keep old things from falling apart. Elena was a freelance cellist, someone who lived in the ephemeral world of sound and vibration. When they bumped into each other in the poetry aisle, dropping a weathered copy of Neruda, the chemistry wasn't a spark, it was a slow, deep pull of gravity. "I think the universe wants us to read this," Elena said, her voice like velvet against the backdrop of the store's hum. She had eyes the color of amber after a storm, warm, but with a hidden depth that suggested she'd seen things most people missed. Caleb, usually grounded and articulate, found himself momentarily speechless. There was a lightness to her, a way she moved that made the heavy mahogany shelves around them seem less imposing. Their first few months were a blur of cinematic warmth. They shared late-night Thai food on the floor of Caleb's unfinished loft, the city lights reflecting off the windows like diamonds scattered on dark velvet. Caleb loved the way she hummed when she was thinking, a low frequency that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. Elena loved how Caleb looked at buildings, not as structures of steel and glass, but as stories that deserved to be told. "Everything has a heartbeat, Caleb," she told him one night as they walked along the pier. The wind was whipping her dark hair across her face, and he reached out to tuck a strand behind her ear. His hand lingered on her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." "I hear yours," he whispered. And he meant it. Their connection was more than physical, it was a rare alignment of souls. They built a world together within the city, a map of their places. The bench where they watched the sunrise, the tiny jazz club where the pianist knew their names, the quiet corner of the library where they'd sit for hours in a shared, comfortable silence. Caleb began to plan a future he'd never dared to imagine. He saw her in every blueprint he drew, every old brick he saved. She was the light in the rooms he built. They were inseparable, a binary star system orbiting a center of pure, unadulterated affection. The world felt vibrant, the colors sharper, the air sweeter. They were in that golden hour of a relationship where it feels like nothing can touch you, where the very concept of endings feels like a myth told to people less fortunate than yourselves. The transition wasn't sudden. It wasn't a crash, it was a leak. It started with Elena losing her place in a piece of music she'd played 1,000 times. Then came the ghost hours, stretches of time where she would sit by the window, staring at the rain, and not respond when Caleb called her name. When she did turn to him, her eyes weren't amber anymore, they were opaque, like a room where the curtains had been drawn. "Elena?" "Hey, I made dinner," Caleb said, placing a hand on her shoulder. She flinched, a small, violent motion that sent a spike of ice through Caleb's chest. I forgot you were home," she whispered. Her voice was thin, a fraying thread. As weeks passed, Elena began to physically fade. Her skin took on a translucent quality, and she complained of a constant, humming cold that no amount of blankets could fix. The doctors were baffled. Tests came back clear, blood work was perfect, yet Elena was disappearing before his eyes. It was as if the world was reclaiming its color from her. She stopped playing the cello, she said the notes felt too heavy to lift. The fear in Caleb began to grow into a living thing, a shadow that sat in the corner of every room. He stayed awake at night, watching her breathe, terrified that if he closed his eyes, she would simply evaporate into the sheets. The woman who taught him to hear the heartbeat of the world was now silent. The dramatic turning point came on a frigid November evening. Caleb arrived home to find the apartment door wide open. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He found Elena standing on the rooftop, dressed only in a thin nightgown. The wind was howling, but she didn't seem to feel it. She was standing at the very edge, looking out at the city as if she were searching for a door. "Elena! Get back from there!" Caleb screamed, rushing toward her. When he grabbed her, she felt like nothing. It wasn't just that she was thin, it was as if her density had changed. She looked at him, and for a terrifying second, she didn't recognize him. I have to go back, she said, her voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance. The sound is calling me back. I'm right here. Caleb is right here, he sobbed, pulling her into his arms. She was so cold he felt like he was hugging a statue of ice. That night, he realized he wasn't just losing his girlfriend, he was losing a part of reality itself. In the weeks following the rooftop incident, Caleb stopped being a man and became a ghost. He took an indefinite leave from work, his blueprints gathering dust, the old buildings he loved left to crumble. He didn't care. The only architecture that mattered now was the crumbling structure of Elena's existence. He stopped eating properly, his face becoming gaunt, his eyes rimmed with the permanent red of exhaustion and grief. He moved through the apartment like a shadow, his only purpose to serve her, to keep her anchored to the earth. He covered the windows with heavy blankets because the light seemed to hurt her. He filled the house with candles, creating a flickering, purgatorial world where time ceased to exist. Caleb's internal breakdown was quiet but total. He would sit on the floor by her bed for 18 hours at a time, holding her hand, which felt increasingly like dry parchment. He talked to her constantly, recounting every memory, every joke, every shared dream, desperate to provide enough weight to keep her from drifting away. Remember the bookstore, Elena? Remember Neruda? He'd whisper, his voice cracking. You said the universe wanted us to meet. You can't leave the universe now. It's not fair. Friends tried to call, but he ignored them. His family knocked on the door, but he wouldn't let them in. He was terrified that if anyone else entered their space, they would bring a draft that might finally blow her away. He was losing his mind, his grip on the logical, structured world of an architect. He began to see things in the shadows, shifting shapes that seemed to be waiting for her. One night, as he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror, he didn't recognize the man looking back. The Caleb who loved the rain and coffee was gone. In his place was a hollow-eyed sentinel, a man who had traded his soul for a few more minutes of a dying woman's presence. But in that darkness, a new, harder determination formed. If the world was trying to take her, he would find out why. He would find a way to fight back, even if he had to tear the world apart to do it. He wasn't just a shadow anymore, he was a shadow with teeth. The condition wasn't a disease, it was a theft. Caleb discovered this while digging through Elena's old journals, looking for any clue he might have missed. Hidden in the lining of her cello case, he found a series of frantic letters from a prestigious institute of sound and resonance she had visited months before they met. The letters, signed by a Dr. Eris Thorne, spoke of vibrational harvesting and soul frequency alignment. Caleb's architectural mind, trained to see the hidden structures of things, began to piece together a horrifying truth. This institute wasn't a clinic, it was a parasitic organization that sought out individuals with high emotional resonance, artists, musicians, poets, and used experimental technology to siphon their essence to fuel a new type of high-end, synthetic experience for the ultra-wealthy. Elena hadn't just gotten sick. She had been targeted. The momentum of the story shifted instantly from mourning to a cold, calculated rage. Caleb didn't go to the police, he knew a man like Thorne would have them in his pocket. Instead, Caleb used his knowledge of the city's older buildings. He knew the building where the institute was located, an old 1920s skyscraper he had once consulted on. He knew the vents, the sub-basements, the structural weaknesses. The confrontation was cinematic and brutal. Caleb broke into the facility at 3 a.m., moving through the shadows like the specter he had become. He bypassed security with a mix of architectural ingenuity and sheer, desperate violence. He found the resonance chamber in the sub-basement, a high-tech nightmare where Elena's stolen frequency was being stored in humming, amber-colored canisters. Dr. Thorne was there, a man who looked more like a corporate shark than a scientist. "You don't understand the science, Mr. Sterling," Thorne said, backed into a corner by a man who looked like he had crawled out of a grave. "We are capturing beauty. We are making it immortal." "You're killing her," Caleb rasped, his hand gripping a heavy wrench he'd used to smash the cooling systems. "And I'm going to make sure you never hear a note of music again." Caleb didn't just save Elena, he destroyed the machine. He shattered the canisters, releasing the stolen frequencies in a blinding, harmonic explosion of light and sound. The building shook to its foundations. He acted with a decisive, terrifying clarity, restoring justice by obliterating the source of her fading. As the alarms wailed and the beauty returned to the air, Caleb scooped up the unconscious Elena and fought his way out, leaving the institute in ruins behind him. The Elena who came back wasn't the same, and neither was Caleb. The harvesting had left scars on her soul that no amount of love could fully heal. She was awake, she was dense again, but the music was gone. She couldn't play the cello, the sound reminded her too much of the machine. But the most profound change was in Caleb. To save her, he had had to become a man capable of violence, a man who could navigate the darkness and destroy. The architect was dead. He could no longer look at a building and see a story, he only saw vulnerabilities. He had looked into the abyss to pull her out, and the abyss had left its mark. He became harder, more protective, his love now tinged with a fierce, almost possessive edge. He moved them to a remote cabin in the woods, away from the city, away from the frequencies of others. He spent his days chopping wood and reinforcing their home, his hands calloused and scarred. He rarely smiled. The lightness he once had, the man who dropped Neruda in a bookstore, was a stranger to him now. Transformation has a cost. The price of Elena's life was Caleb's peace. He lived in a state of constant vigilance, always listening for the hum of the machine, always checking the perimeter. Love hadn't just changed him, it had forged him into a weapon. Elena saw it. She saw the way he looked at his hands sometimes, as if he didn't recognize them. She saw the way he jumped at the sound of a bird's wings. One evening, sitting by the fire, she reached out and touched his face. "You saved me, Caleb," she said softly. "But who saved you?" He didn't have an answer. He had become someone else so she could be herself again. He had traded his gentleness for her survival, and while he didn't regret it, the weight of the trade sat heavy on his chest. They lived in a beautiful, quiet world, but it was a world built on the ruins of who they used to be. The story concludes not with a return to the golden hour, but with a deeper, more profound understanding. A year after the destruction of the institute, Caleb and Elena stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the first snow of winter fall. Elena had started to hum again. It wasn't the complex concertos of her past, but a simple, earthy melody, a song of the trees and the wind. Caleb sat behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I used to think love was a feeling," Caleb said, his voice quiet, reflecting on the journey. "I thought it was the bookstore and the coffee and the light. I didn't know it was also the dark. I didn't know it was the wrench and the blood and the fear." Elena turned in his arms, her amber eyes finally clear, reflecting the white snow. "Love isn't the absence of pain, Caleb. It's what makes the pain worth it. We aren't the people we were in Seattle. We're better, because we're whole. Even the broken parts are ours." The final message of their story is a powerful one for the audience. Love and pain are not opposites, they are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have the depth of one without the capacity for the other. Caleb had become a shadow, then a warrior, and finally, a man who understood that his scars were the blueprint of his devotion. They realized that the echoes of their past, the trauma, the loss, the transformation, were what gave their present its resonance. They weren't just survivors, they were the architects of a new kind of love, one that didn't fear the fading because it knew how to find the way back. As the screen fades to black, the sound of a single, soulful cello note rings out, a note played by Elena, shaky but pure. It is a reminder that while the world may try to steal our light, as long as there is someone willing to become a shadow to find us, we are never truly lost. Love is a choice to endure, a commitment to stay when the music stops, and the courage to start a new song together. Final message: true love doesn't leave you as it found you. It breaks you, remakes you, and leaves you with a heart that knows the value of every single heartbeat.
Subscribe, like, and tell people about this love.